Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Undersecretary Nuland, thank you for testifying today. We are sitting here watching the most significant military conflict in Europe unfold since 1945, since the end of World War II. And I'm sorry to say that this war, I believe, is the direct result of repeated mistakes made by President Biden and the Biden administration. Two mistakes in particular. Number one, the disastrous withdrawal in Afghanistan and surrender to the Taliban that emboldened our enemies across the globe. But then number two, with respect to Russia and Ukraine, very specific mistakes. You and I have talked at great length about Nord Stream 2. As you know, this committee and the Congress won a bipartisan victory stopping Nord Stream 2 in 2019. I authored that legislation. As a result, Putin was deterred from invading Ukraine. When Joe Biden became president, he came in bound and determined to surrender the Nord Stream 2 pipeline to Russia and Putin, notwithstanding the enormous risks that came from it. When President Biden surrendered to Putin on Nord Stream 2, waived the sanctions that had been passed by Congress, at that time, Ukraine told us, if you do this, Russia will invade Ukraine. At that time, Poland told us, if you do this, Russia will invade Ukraine. At that time, I told the administration, and others on this committee told the administration, if you do this, Russia will invade Ukraine. We will see tanks in the streets of Kiev. I wish those predictions had proven wrong. This weekend, all 100 senators were on a video conference call with President Zelensky from Ukraine. President Zelensky told us if the United States government had put sanctions in place last year on Nord Stream 2, Putin would not have invaded Ukraine. And yet the administration was bound and determined to continue surrendering to Russia, even as Russian troops massed on the border of Ukraine, so much so that the White House put political pressure and forced 44 Democrats to vote to support Russia and Putin just weeks before this invasion. Now, after the invasion, finally, once there were Russian troops invading Ukraine, finally then, the Biden administration was dragged kicking and screaming to implementing sanctions on Nord Stream 2. As soon as you did, Nord Stream 2 declared bankruptcy and fired its employees. Now, in my judgment, Putin does not believe any promise from Joe Biden to maintain sanctions on Nord Stream 2 is credible. I think Putin is gambling that when the crisis passes, the sanctions will be lifted and Nord Stream 2 will be turned on. I've introduced legislation to make Nord Stream 2 sanctions permanent. In your judgment, do you believe sanctions on Nord Stream 2 should be permanent, or should the pipeline be allowed to be turned on?
Senator, I think Nord Stream 2 is now dead, and as you have said, it is a hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea. I don't think it will ever be revived.
So you don't think it will? So let me reiterate my question. Should the sanctions be permanent as a matter of law, in your judgment?
I don't think it matters one way or the other. I think the pipeline will never come back.
So you're testifying you have no objections then, and state has no objections to Congress making the sanctions permanent?
We haven't looked at what this would do, but I don't think it's relevant one way or the other.
Well, it is relevant because Biden waived them once in the face of massive congressional pressure.
Senator,
and put politics ahead of national security, and I believe Putin believes Biden will do it again.
Senator,
when the administration announced sanctions on Russia, it glaringly exempted energy from those sanctions. Now, this morning, the Biden administration listened to calls from me and from many others to finally include a boycott of Russian oil and gas. That was the right thing to do, but it should have been done at the outset. But Europe continues to rely on Russian energy. In your judgment, will our European allies follow suit and also boycott Russian energy?
As you have made clear, Senator, and as we all know, the Europeans have a much higher level of dependence today to heat their homes, to keep the lights on.
Is the Biden administration pressing the Europeans to end their reliance on Russia? And is the Biden administration pressing them to rely on alternative sources, including American energy, which is abundant and doesn't fuel a dictator like Putin.
So among the things that we have done as this crisis was emerging and since it started was to ship more American LNG and to create more global alternatives to Putin's gas going into Europe, as you know.
There are 6
including
applications pending with the Biden administration to export LNG. None of them have been approved. Do you have any expectations that any of them will be?
So the European LNG terminals right now are at full capacity to receive.
Okay, you're not
one
answering
of the
the
things. One of the things that we are pressing Europe.
Are you going to answer the question?
Can I try to?
You can answer the question.
Can I try to answer the question? We have taken advantage of this tragedy to again speak to Europe about its over-reliance on Russian energy.
The question was simple. Do you
and
anticipate
to
the
say to
applications
them,
to export LNG will be approved? You're not answering that question.
I frankly don't do LNG licensing. I expect that licenses will be approved for as much LNG as can be shipped. That's what I expect. But I don't, have responsibility for that, so I don't actually know how it works. But, Senator, I have to say to you, President Putin was going to launch this vicious, brutal war with or without Nord Stream 2.
That's not what Zelensky told us.
That is my opinion.
That's also not what you said when you testified before the Senate.
Time of the senator has expired. Senator Merkley?